Keanu Reeves lives in my head rent-free, and whenever he's in the news, you guys best believe I gotta know everything about it.
Matrix star Keanu Reeves became a Windsor Spitfire for at least a day.
Keanu Reeves is known for his iconic action roles, from John Wick to Neo in The Matrix. But recently, his real-life actions proved just as impressive. A homeless individual, infamous for targeting unsuspecting strangers, had been terrorizing the streets. On one fateful day, he ran into Keanu Reeves, and that would mark the end of his thieving spree. What happened when the thief tried to strike? Did Keanu fight back? Join us as we reveal how this dangerous encounter was stopped thanks to Keanu's quick thinking and decisive action. An interrupted routine. The late afternoon sun filtered through the windows of Tokyo Sushi, casting soft golden rays across the cozy interior. The restaurant, a humble yet welcoming space, was filled with the gentle hum of quiet conversation and the clink of utensils against plates. Mr. Albert sat at a small table near the back, savoring the last few bites of his sushi lunch. At 64, he had become a regular at this small spot, visiting almost every afternoon for a peaceful meal after running his errands. His routine was as predictable as the sun setting, and the staff had long since come to recognize the elderly man, always offering him a warm greeting as he entered. Mr. Albert's face, lined with age, carried the weight of a full life, one filled with the kind of experiences that could only be gained with time. He was content with his simple, predictable life, rarely attracting attention and never asking for much. The few people who noticed him thought of him as part of the furniture, someone who had been around for as long as the old trees lining the street outside. Today, however, something was different. Across the restaurant, in a shadowed corner, a young man sat nursing a glass of water. His eyes were fixed on Mr. Albert, who sat oblivious to the looming threat. The young man had been watching him for days, noting his predictable routine. The elderly man's daily visits to Tokyo Sushi were like clockwork. To the young man, Mr. Albert had become more than just an old man who dined alone. He had become an opportunity, an easy mark in a life that had become anything but easy. The young man, later identified as Jamil, homeless and struggling, had reached a breaking point. His patience had worn thin and desperation had set in. His eyes, dark and hollow with the weight of unmet needs, flickered with a restless energy. In his mind, Mr. Albert's frailty was an invitation, a chance to take what he needed without resistance. His plan was simple. Wait until the elderly man finished his meal, then strike. It would be quick. The older man wouldn't stand a chance. As Mr. Albert finished his sushi, lost in his thoughts, Jamil stood up from his seat, slowly moving toward the elderly man's table. With calculated steps, he approached, his heart racing in his chest. He reached out, his fingers brushing the leather strap of Mr. Albert's bag. Just as he was about to snatch it, something unexpected happened. The door to the restaurant swung open, and in walked a familiar face, Keanu Reeves. In town for a low-profile independent film project, Keanu had wandered into Tokyo Sushi in search of a quiet meal, far removed from the press and fanfare that usually followed him. He'd been in the area for a few days now, relishing the peacefulness of this part of town. As he entered, he didn't immediately notice the tense exchange happening at the far corner of the restaurant. Keanu slid into a booth by the window, ordering a simple sushi platter and a cup of tea. He let his mind wander as he took in the atmosphere, the comforting, unhurried pace of the small eatery. For once, he felt anonymous, a rare feeling in his otherwise chaotic world. He sat back, taking in the quiet, the smell of fresh fish, and the soft buzz of conversation. It was the kind of moment that Keanu often sought out when he needed to recharge. But his tranquility was short-lived. As he waited for his meal, Keanu's gaze wandered across the room. He noticed the elderly man, Mr. Albert, sitting at his table, seemingly unbothered, enjoying his lunch. But as he looked closer, Keanu's sharp eyes caught the movement at the other table. The young man, Jamil, now hovering just behind Mr. Albert, ready to make his move. In an instant, Keanu realized what was happening. Jamil reached out, grabbing Mr. Albert's bag with sudden force. The elderly man, caught off guard, stumbled backward, his face a mixture of confusion and fear. The thief was quick, too quick. He yanked the bag from Mr. Albert's grasp and started toward the door, moving with purpose. Keanu's reflexes kicked in. Without hesitation, he stood, his calm demeanor transforming into purposeful action. He saw Mr. Albert's distress, the look of shock on his face as he struggled to regain his balance. In the same breath, Keanu's focus shifted to the young man sprinting toward the exit, the stolen bag clutched tightly in his hand. Keanu's training and instincts had long been honed, not just through years of action roles, but also through his own sense of right and wrong. He wasn't about to let the thief get away. As Jamil neared the door, Keanu followed in pursuit, moving with a quiet intensity that made his movements seem almost effortless. The thief had no idea what was coming. Unexpected hero. Jamil, still reeling from the force of Keanu's intervention, scrambled to break free, but Keanu's grip was ironclad. Despite the desperate thrashing, Keanu's focus remained unwavering. Jamil's, in a panic, threw wild punches, hoping to land a blow that would give him a chance to escape, but each of his attempts was swiftly blocked. The street around them seemed to fade into a blur as Keanu's attention was fully on the man beneath him. It was clear now, the thief wasn't just fighting for freedom. There was something else in his struggle, a sense of fear that pushed him to do whatever he could to break away. But Keanu wasn't about to let him go. The young man was on the ground, his body pinned beneath Keanu's weight, yet still squirming and twisting in an attempt to escape. His face contorted in frustration and desperation. Keanu's calm, deliberate presence contrasted sharply with the thief's panicked movements. The older man who had been attacked, Mr. Albert, sat nearby, still shaken and clutching his chest where the blow had struck him. His breathing was ragged, the pain from the fall and the shock of the assault taking its toll. The restaurant, which had been a quiet, peaceful space just moments ago, now felt tense. The owner, Timothy Ratcliffe, stood in the doorway, eyes wide, watching the scene unfold. He had been the first to respond, running to Mr. Albert's side as soon as the attack had happened. Now he stood back, allowing Keanu to handle the situation. Keanu's attention never wavered. He had been in similar situations before, although never quite like this. He knew how to subdue someone, but this was different. This wasn't a film scene, this was real life, with real consequences. And he wasn't just stopping an attacker, he was holding a man who had done something unforgivable. He had taken advantage of an elderly man, assaulting him in broad daylight. Jamil's squirming became more frantic, his chest heaving as he tried to free himself from Keanu's grip. But the harder he fought, the tighter Keanu held on. Time seemed to stretch in those few minutes as Keanu remained firmly in control. The thief's movements were sluggish, the adrenaline from his escape attempt starting to drain as the realization of his helplessness began to settle in. With each passing second, his resistance weakened. Keanu's mind definitely raced as he held him, but his focus never faltered. He was alert, watching every movement carefully, knowing that one wrong shift could give the man a chance to escape. But Keanu had the advantage. Jamil's legs were tangled in Keanu's, his arms pinned beneath him. His body, once full of frantic energy, was now growing still. There was nothing left to fight for. The sound of sirens in the distance echoed, and Keanu knew that help was finally on the way. Jamil stopped moving, exhaustion finally taking over. He lay there, panting heavily, his chest rising and falling with each breath. Keanu's grip remained firm, though not as tight as before, just enough to ensure that the thief would not make another move. His mind was still sharp, alert for any change in the situation, but it seemed the struggle was over. A few moments later, the police arrived, their vehicles screeching to a halt in front of the restaurant. Officers rushed out, their hands on their holsters as they took in the scene. Keanu, with an air of calm authority, stood up and stepped aside, allowing the officers to take control. He hadn't done this for recognition. He had done it because he saw something wrong and had to make it right. The officers moved swiftly, cuffing Jamil and reading him his rights. As the officers led the thief away, Keanu glanced over at Mr. Albert, who was still sitting on the curb, his hand pressed against his ribs, his face pale but recovering. The old man offered him a nod of gratitude, his eyes full of recognition and silent appreciation. Timothy Ratcliffe, the restaurant owner, finally stepped forward. His eyes met Keanu's. He said he didn't know what would have happened if Keanu wasn't there. His voice, a mixture of relief and respect. Keanu only gave a small nod in response, his face a mask of calm. He didn't need praise. For him, the satisfaction came from knowing he had done what was right. As the scene around him returned to normal, with Jamil now in custody and Mr. Albert being tended to by medics, Keanu took a step back. His day was far from over, and as the sun dipped lower in the sky, he disappeared quietly into the crowd. Just another figure on the streets, his role in the day's events already fading into the background but not forgotten. The aftermath. Later that evening, after the police had taken the suspect into custody and the scene had been cleared, a group of reporters gathered outside the restaurant eager for a story. Word had spread quickly about the dramatic incident, and now the media was clamoring for every detail. They had heard the basics from the officers on the scene and were ready to ask questions. Their cameras were trained on the front door, their notebooks poised for the next headline. Mr. Albert, still shaken by the events of the day, stepped out of the restaurant. His mind was still a blur of emotions, fear, relief, confusion, but the second he emerged, the attention turned to him. He was greeted by a chorus of voices, reporters pressing forward with their microphones and cameras aimed directly at him. For the first time in years, he felt like the center of the world. The calm, quiet life he had led in the neighborhood now felt a distant memory. The reporters were relentless, peppering him with questions about the attack, how he felt, and the man who had come to his rescue. Mr. Albert tried to focus, but the flash of cameras and the swarm of people surrounding him made it difficult to process everything. He had been in a state of shock only hours earlier, and now the world seemed to demand answers. He explained in slow, measured words that he was still recovering from the ordeal. His voice was steady, though his hands shook slightly. The attack had happened so fast. One moment he was enjoying a peaceful lunch, and the next he was on the ground, struggling to understand what had just happened. He hadn't been able to react in time, too stunned by the sudden violence. But what he would never forget was the calm intervention of the stranger who had stepped in when no one else did. The reporters pushed further, asking him about the man who had helped him. Mr. Albert mentioned that he had not recognized Keanu Reeves at first. He was too shaken by the events, too disoriented to process the identity of the person who had grabbed the attacker and prevented the situation from escalating further. It wasn't until later, when the news reports came in, that he learned who his savior had been. The realization left him in awe, though he remained humble, not wanting to dwell too much on the celebrity aspect. To Mr. Albert, it wasn't about the fame or who Keanu Reeves was. It was about what had happened in that moment, how someone had done what needed to be done regardless of who they were. He had been rescued by a stranger, a man who saw an elderly person in danger and chose to act, to help in a way that most would hesitate to do. In a world that often felt indifferent to the plight of others, Keanu had shown him a rare kind of kindness. As the reporters pressed him further on how he felt about the attacker, Mr. Albert's expression grew more serious. He wasn't angry, he said, but saddened. It wasn't just the attack that had shaken him. It was the realization that the young man had found himself in such a desperate situation. The attack wasn't personal, he explained. It was an act born from a place of need and misfortune. While he didn't condone the actions of the thief, Mr. Albert expressed a quiet sympathy for the young man. In his eyes, the attacker had made a poor choice, but the root of that choice was something deeper, something that needed more attention than anger could provide. The questions eventually slowed, and the reporters seemed to sense that Mr. Albert had said all he could for the moment. His answers had been thoughtful, but he was exhausted, both mentally and physically. The flashing lights and constant barrage of questions only added to the weight of the day's events. As the reporters finally began to disperse, Mr. Albert turned away, the quiet settling back over him. He walked down the street, the night air cool against his skin. The neighborhood, which had seemed so chaotic just hours before, was now calm again. People were returning to their homes, going about their evening routines, unaware of the drama that had unfolded just outside. Yet for Mr. Albert, everything had changed. The fear and the pain from the attack still lingered, but so did a sense of gratitude, a quiet appreciation for the man who had intervened, for the police who had arrived swiftly, and for the community that had offered support in the wake of the incident. As he made his way home, the night felt strangely peaceful. The world, for all its unpredictability and turmoil, still had moments of kindness, and he was thankful for that. He could only hope that the young man who had attacked him would find a way out of the life that had led to such a violent act. But for now, Mr. Albert would rest, knowing that despite the ordeal, things could have turned out much worse. What do you think about Keanu's response to Jamil's attack? Was it simply a result of his action movie training, or does it reveal something deeper about his character? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the following video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.